Modifieds. Possibly the coolest race cars you could ever see. You don't want to take my word for it? Come watch it yourself. Welcome back, everyone. We are here in the new race shop. It's still not done, still moving stuff in. But I wanted to get in here for today's topic, today's video. What is the difference between all these modifieds? What is the difference between the SK Modified and its big brother, the Tour Modified? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're here in the race shop. The first video of the shop is going to be talking about modifieds. Man, look how sick that thing looks. That's crazy looking. A lot of people have been asking, what does a SK Modified mean? What is a Tour Modified? What's their differences? And we're going to go over that today. We'll jump right into it. From the outside, they are very similar. Not much different. The bodies are the same. The wheels are the same. Nerf bars are all the same. So not much differences in appearance wise. One thing that you could use to tell the difference between SK and a Tour Modified just from the outside itself is the headers. SK Modifieds use stainless steel headers and generally are running these, especially the Stafford Speedway SK Modifieds, these shorter Bea mufflers or Cook's mufflers. Generally they're all that style. Where Tour Modified, unfortunately mine's not a good example. Here's a photo of a modified with tri-Y headers, but you could tell just off the headers themselves. Generally the Tour type modifieds have the tri-Ys that are more flowing headers and help the exhaust flow out better. You'll see that as a big difference in between an SK and a Tour type modified. Another difference before we even take the body off, the SK runs a 2-barrel carburetor. You could kind of see that while the hood's still on. On some cars you can't tell at all. Where the Tour type modified runs a big 4-barrel, and you can see that right there. A 390 usually. Some places around 650, 7, I don't know. 4-barrel, 2-barrel. So those are two differences you could tell just based off of the outside appearance. I know on my SK I have the oil cooler mounted on the outside. There is one in the Tour car as well. It's just inside the body. So you can't really tell by that. Mostly it's just the headers and that carburetor. That's the easiest way to tell, but we're going to dig in further. Let's jump in under the hoods because that is the biggest difference for sure. Let's take a look at what we got. Now that we got the hoods off, you can see a big difference now. This is the Tour Modified. It has a big built engine, 23 degree, 360 cubic inch, right around 600 horsepower, a little bit above it, depending on who you ask. It is a dry sump engine, so it has an oil pump off a belt pulley back to the oil sump tank back here. Runs about 12 quarts of oil. Both cars actually use the same type of oil. Just this one uses 4 more quarts because it's such a big tank and it's pumping so much through it. We have to run a remote oil filter. It's way up here. Not much space in these cars because the front of the engine is just so big. Oil cooler, like I said, is mounted inside. Yeah, the engine itself. As I said before, it has a 4-barrel, 390. Runs a 2-inch spacer compared to the SK Modified that runs a 1-inch spacer plate. You'll see this engine also has a lot more oil lines and water lines running all around to keep this thing cool. I guess that makes it go faster. I'm not an engine guy. I'd like to try to take apart an engine and rebuild it to see if I could figure out how that stuff works. This isn't my forte, but big difference is engine. Let's go check out the SK engine and see what the differences are there. Thank you guys for watching today's video. I hope you're enjoying it. Just a quick break from this video. I just want to talk to you guys about my website, davidaroot.com. Head on over there, order yourself some merchandise, t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, anything you think of. We'll be adding more stuff throughout this off season. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I greatly appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. Man, that pumpkin car is pretty cool. I should keep that scheme. Now we're over at the SK, a much smaller engine itself. I mean, I guess they're kind of the same size. This is a spec engine. There's specific parts you have to use in this engine. You can't just find some of the best items you can and throw them in and make a lot of power. There are specific part numbers we have to use. The head, the pistons, the rings, there's everything, the cam. There's a lot of rules that go into this engine to help us, because the typical racer, we will spend the most amount of money to go fast. And that's what this division was created for, from my Grandpa Jack, was a cost-effective way to keep modifieds racing. And the tour cars back then and even now are far too expensive for a lot of people to race. So the SK was invented back then to get a lot more people racing, and that's what it did. And this engine was introduced quite a few years ago as a spec engine. That's changed since my grandfather created the division, but this engine is right around 400 horsepower. Spec rules, 2-barrel carburetor, 1-inch spacer plate. There's air filter rules, there's spec rules. The headers have specific rules, where on the open cars you can pretty much run whatever you want. Now, if we check something out underneath the car, I wanted to show you guys this. We're underneath the SK now. Another big difference in these engines is SKs run a steel bell housing, where over on the open car you're allowed to pretty much run aluminum. I think it says no tie, no magnesium. I can't remember what it is, but you could run a lightweight bell housing. We have an aluminum oil pan on the SK, where over on the tour car, I'm sure you could run one, but it's a much smaller oil pan because there's no oil actually in the pan. It's all in the tank itself. Now we're over at the SK, where we run a 486 rear end, and it's a straight rear. There's no quick change case on the back side right here. It's just a straight rear 486. Now if we go over to the tour car, you'll see this is a little bit different, where it's a quick change rear. It has the case on the back, and we're actually running a 411 ring and pinion. So now the reason we run a quick change in the tour car is not only because it's allowed, but it makes it easier for us when we have to change gears to go to different tracks. Where Stafford, the SK, runs a 486, we don't have to change that. It's the rule, and we run that every single week. The 411 ring and pinion and the quick change allows us to change the gear for every track we go to. Stafford, Waterford, Seekonk. Where else did we go this year? Is that it? Yeah, I guess that's all. I didn't go to too many places this year. But in years past, Star, Thunder Road. So you run a different gear at all these tracks. So the quick change makes that an option to change the rear end ratio without actually having to buy a complete rear end per track. Now that we've finished talking about all the drivetrain, the one big difference between the SK and the tour car that get the power to the ground are the tires themselves. On the SK, we run M30s on the lefts and M450s on the right. It's a harder compound. Where on the tour car, we run M30s, which is our left side SK tire. We run M30s on the right side of the car and M20s on the left side. So a lot softer tires, which then make it into a tire strategy race where you can't use up all your car, all your tire, and it just changes the game a little bit. A lot of the tour type races are more than 40 laps versus the SK run. Usually they're 100, 75. So it's a strategy game of saving the tire, making them last, where they'll just fall off because they're gumballs. There's only a few other small differences between the tour car and the SK itself. We have the shocks Those are a little bit different, where in the SK there is a shock rule. 3 shocks are allowed. They range from $300 to $440. That is the rule itself. So there are 3 shocks there, where in the tour car, it's kind of wide open. You could run whatever shocks you want. There is no rule. It just says, well, I guess there is a rule, I just lied to you. The rule is single adjustable, which we have down here, this adjuster right here. Single adjustable shocks, and that's it. Along with the shock difference, another small one is the brakes themselves. We're over at the tour car where you're allowed to run floating rotors. When I say floating, you can see it moves just the slightest bit. That helps the rotor stay centered in the caliper when you're at speed and hitting the bumps, and it just helps everything stay relatively centered. Where on the SK, you are not allowed to run floating rotors, but we use the same caliper. So overall, these cars are very similar, with the main differences being the engine packages themselves, and of course the expenses, which is why the SK Modified was invented, introduced, developed, announced, I don't know. Tour modified racing at the time, back in the 80s, when my Grandpa Jack ran them weekly here, were just getting overpriced and people weren't competing them as much. They were losing cars and it just wasn't sustainable, and that's why the SK Modified was born. But now the question is, what is an SK Light? And why did we develop that? Why is that now one of the most popular divisions? What happened to the SK Modified to have my dad, Mark Arute, which a lot of you may not know, my dad develop a new division again? Well, let me bring you back to 2006, when the SK Modifieds were, or still are, one of the most competitive divisions in the country, where that was the stepping stone to go SK Modified to tour type racing. But then it turned into, people were so competitive in SKs, they didn't want to leave, which is fine. It just came into this veteran class of people that raced forever, and you couldn't just jump in and start learning about modifieds in the SK division. It turned into the same problem as before, where the cars started to get expensive. People would just outspend each other, and that would then cause the cars to get faster and faster and faster, and it just turned into this division of, you can't be a rookie and not have any experience in a modified or working on modifieds and jump into the SK and not get chewed up and spit out. It was evident that some drivers couldn't compete in SKs, or didn't even belong in the division. Not that they didn't belong, but it was too much for them to handle. Like, there needed to be something else that these beginner drivers could go to, or these first time drivers could go to, that wasn't the most competitive division in the Northeast. And that leads us to 2006, when my father, Mark Arute, introduced the SK Light Modified. Used as a stepping stone, a stepping ladder, a stair, if you will. I got some stairs, check them out, they're right there. But a ladder system, right? You go from SK Light to the SK, hopefully stay, because we like to have you here and we want you to keep putting on a show, and then a Tour Modified, a ladder system. The SK Light was introduced to help drivers learn the craft of modified. Not only as a driver, but a team. You start putting together your team in the SK Lights, you all learn the car a lot more, and you move up to the SK Modified and you know what you're doing. But what is the difference now between an SK Light and the SK? Luckily, we have all 3 cars right here in the shop, and we could go over what the difference is. The obvious, yet again, is the engine. You'll see this car is it's missing some stuff on the front. Alex raced it at Waterford, and Well, honestly, I broke a bolt-on my car, so I stole it off this car. What is it, stealing from Peter to pay Paul? Robbing Paul to pay Peter? I don't know. But the biggest difference is the engine itself. This division was introduced with a GM stock engine, was very affordable at the time. It still is affordable for an engine, race engine, but it's starting to get up there in price. A 602 crate engine, around 300 horsepower, I do believe. Way you could tell the difference between SK Light and SK is the headers. SK Lights run mild steel headers, no stainless steel in our SK Light division. That's a very obvious way to tell the difference. Another is if the hood's off, you could see the spacer plate. These run the standard like 2-hole spacer plate where the SKs run 1 big hole. Other than that, no outside differences. The bodies are the same. The tires are the same, wheels, Nerf bars, all of that. Another small difference between the cars is if we go back to what powers the engine. No, not the sparkulators, not the lightning box, but the fuel. Yes. The SK and the tour car both run Sunoco Supreme. I believe it's 112. The SK Light, on the other hand, runs Sunoco GTX, which is a much less potent gas. It's a 260, so it's a lot less expensive. SKs and the tour cars are about $14 a gallon, I think, where the SK Lights run around 11. The fuel cells are the same. The tour car has some different options. You could run aluminum, I think, where in the SK Light you have to run a steel container and a bladder style system. Generally it's ATL, the Schultz Engineering, or Fuel Safe, I believe it is. They have a bladder system. So the bladders and the fuel cell themselves are the same, but the fuel itself is different. On track difference. What you guys see from up in the stands that looks different. Not only do the tour cars generally run more laps on a standard like 80s, the open 80s, 100 lappers, 75, 125, they run a lot more laps. SK Modifieds run 40, and the SK Lights are generally 20. Now the speed, we have about 100 miles per hour entering the corner in the SK Light. The SK Modified runs right around 110 to 112, while the Tour Type Modified is around 120 entering the corner. Now with these Modifieds and their massive tires, the 15-inch tires, the corner speeds are what makes these insane to watch. Not only do they have offset bodies, right, which you could see when the camera's like this, how insane that looks. Not only is the body always offset, and that helps aerodynamics a little bit, but these massive tires help you grip through the corner and have a crazy amount of corner speed. Now that brings me to the last topic, the difference between all three of these. Well, I guess two of them are the same, and that's the communication. Now, SK Light Modifieds are one-way radio straight from the race control, where they tell them the caution's out, or someone's spinning, someone's black flagged, everything that they need to know. There are no spotter communication, no crew communication, just a single one-way radio. Now that brings me over to the SK Modified. We use two-way radio communications. We use a spotter. We have communications to our pit crew down on pit road for if we need to come in for a pit stop, which again, SK Lights have no pitting. No infield pitting, it's just 20 laps. If you get it flat, unfortunately, that's it. Where SK Modifieds, you have the pit crew, you have the communications, and you have longer races. So we have the push to talk buttons down on the shifter, that's where I put it. SK Lights do not have a push to talk. We have the wiring harness, which I guess SK Lights could use still, but it's not necessary. Now internally, they're all pretty much the same. We went over the transmissions in the tour car and the SK. In the SK Lite, it runs a Saginaw 3-speed, so a very reliable transmission. You could find some in the junkyard probably. But the shifter, there's a standard shifter in all three of them. We have our SFI rated seats within a certain date, all full containment, SFI rated belts within 3 years. We got the window nets. Everything is up to safety standards. All three cars are the same across every division. Internally, they're all the same. The open cars have a little more wiring. You'll see we run a ignition box. SK and the SK Lite do not. SK Lites do have a rev limiter box, an MSD box up front. It has to be out of reach. And underneath all of this, the chassis, identical. If you wanted to, you could start in SK Lites, use that chassis in the SKs, and then also use it in the Tour type modified. My cars are a little bit different because the quick change takes up some more space and needs some more bracketry. So there's a couple different brackets in there, but all in all, the chassis itself is all the same. Well, you guys now know the difference between all three modifieds, the SK Lite, the SK, and the Tour car. Let me know down in the comments, which is your favorite division? Currently, in years past, anything. What stands out to you? What races stand out to you the most? Are you a big SK fan of years past, or just let me know down in the comments. What is your favorite modified between the SK Lite, the SK, and the Tour modified? Thank you guys for watching today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed learning the difference between all the modifieds. Comment down below what else you want to see. And until then, throttle down and we'll see you at the races.